Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming today to this exciting webinar. We've got quite a slate of webinars coming up through the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. I'm Dr. Michael Wilcox. I am the Associate Director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development on behalf of Dr. Maria Marshall, the Director. I want to welcome everyone today to today's webinar, Civic Engagement, the Good, the Bad, and the Learning. A classic title for my friends at the University of Minnesota. The presenters today are all from the University of Minnesota Extension Department of Community Development's Leadership and Civic Engagement program. I want to welcome my good friend Jody Horntvedt. She's an extension educator. Abbey Guggisberg, my newest friend from the University of Minnesota. She's an extension educator as well. And Kathy Quick, who's a state specialist there at the University of Minnesota Extension. In this webinar, they'll address the task of defining civic engagement as they share the University of Minnesota Extension Community Development's process model and its connection to their experiences working with communities. Very briefly, I'd like to let you know about two other upcoming webinars. Next week on Tuesday, September 30th at 1 p.m. Eastern, the Regional Rural Development Centers, all four sister centers, are hosting the webinar, The Landscape of Mental Health and Financial Support for Midwest Farmers. Their researchers will present findings from the first 2 years of their 5-year research project that examines the support farmers in the Midwest have and how they engage with it. And on October 28th, right before Halloween, the NCRCRD's next webinar will be Strong Communities Start Here, introducing Missouri's Civic Muscle Index. This webinar will introduce a new online tool developed by the University of Minnesota Extension for local leaders. To keep things brief, we simply encourage you to visit NCRCRD's webinar page to learn more about these webinars and register for both of them. They should be exciting and engaging, just like the one that we're about to enjoy now. So, Jody et al., take it away.
So thank you, Michael, for that introduction. And thank you and the others at NCRD for your leadership around the pieces that you do. We do appreciate that and look to the NCRCRD for resources and other things. You mentioned the title, the classic, The Good, the Bad, and the Learning. We had a hard time thinking about what we would call this presentation, and that's what we landed on because, you know, we've had some great experiences around civic engagement. We've had some experiences where maybe they didn't go as intended, and always ever present is the learning. And so today we hope to highlight a few things with you and actually talk about some of the things we've learned along the way. So with that, I'm going to get us started and do a warm up. I always want to know where folks in the room are coming from. And so if you would, please, in the chat, when I hear civic engagement, I think, would you fill in that blank and just put a note in the chat and just give us a sense of, and if you're willing to put, you know, where you're from, or your title, your role, whatever that might be, along with that. That would be helpful for us too. It helps us get to know people a little bit so we can customize what we share to some degree. So I'll invite you to chat to the group. Oh, look at this coming. Yes. Participation, communication, trust, partnerships, community engagement, not just civic. We're getting some descriptions there. Outreach. Oh my goodness. Yes. Lots of people making a difference, people showing up. And not just communication, two-way communication. I'm seeing that showing in there now. Thank you for this. As it turns out, we all have a variety of different definitions that we use, and we're going to get into that today. As we move through the conversation, we have 3 things that we would like to highlight during the presentation today. And it's actually our invitation to you. We'd like to invite you to consider ways in which your work aligns with the extension process model that we're going to talk a little bit about. And I'll be doing that sort of take a look at our process model and other elements. And then I'm going to invite my colleague Abbey to help us clarify definitions around civic engagement and how that aligns with how other people define it. And then we'll be inviting our colleague Kathy Quick into sort of deepening perspectives and some of those important and challenging questions and how we approach civic engagement in our work. And so I'm just going to move us right into this and get us started around these pieces. And I see there's still a few, chats that came in. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on civic engagement, those completing that sentence. And here we go. So in Minnesota Extension, I'm going to start with prior to 2004 because we didn't have a Department of Community Development in Extension here. There were a number of us colleagues who would get together, sort of a specialization, because we believed this work was so important, work in community development. And so in 2004, when our entire extension system was restructured, we had an opportunity to really come together into a program area called Leadership and Civic Engagement. And with that, we decided in those early conversations to group our programming into 3 areas. One was facilitation, and because often educators were invited to facilitate conversations around challenges in communities. And so we knew that that was an important part of this work around leadership and civic engagement. There was also the elements of leadership. Some of us had been leading cohort programs for a few years and asked to do workshops, education, leadership. It was mostly around education in doing that. And then this piece called civic engagement. And it was actually, I'm going to actually have Abby go back just a little, please. She's jumping the gun here. Civic engagement was in our position descriptions, but it was really undefined. And so the path that we took from there is saying, it's in our descriptions, we should have programming in this area. And it really dug us into thinking about what is that and what does that look at. So I'm going to say that over time things shifted. So we learned that we didn't have the capacity for facilitating conversations in multiple communities. So we transitioned our facilitation work to facilitation teaching and trying to build the capacity of leaders in communities to do that facilitation for themselves. We also learned that leadership cohorts were more effective than doing the one-time workshops. And so we really emphasized the importance of bringing people together in a cohort, learning over time, and really coming together in order to help them take action in their communities, to help them build their skills. And we look at it as build their comprehension, their capacity in multiple ways, but around their competence, their connections, and their confidence to do those things. And then within civic engagement, we learned that within civic engagement, there was a need to build capacity for creating collaborative environments. And so we began doing a lot of work with partners to create those collaborative environments and spaces. And, this work really around civic engagement got its momentum for us in about 2009 when we developed our civic engagement model and moved into that space of defining that. So this model that you see on the screen actually is part of the learning. We learned there was this need for an academic framework and a model to guide our program development and describe this to the public. So this model was created from both research and practical experiences of those of us who were working with communities around those kinds of conversations and helping to move things through. We often learned, and by creating the model that we did, we needed that because things weren't always working well. So these 5 stages we found were really critical. The first stage starts up at the top. There's always a public issue coming into this, and it's about bringing conveners and community together, and the need to prepare. And it's understanding the context in which the issue is going to be addressed so that we can assess community readiness is a part of that. And the phase ends with the need to launch the work into a public issue, work on that public issue into that next phase using some civic engagement tools and public discussion, reflection, and collaboration, all of those pieces. Inquire is that next stage. And there it was about dialogue and deliberation to better understand all aspects of the issue. And often the presenting issue is explored and clarified and, looking at determining possible underlying issues. And deliberation really needed to happen there to understand and frame the issue and clarify that. From there, it would move into analyze, which is really trying to look at multiple viewpoints and deepening understanding of issues. And that notion again of deliberation to generate some options that would move the group forward. From there, it goes to synthesize and conduct the dialogue to really align the clarified issue with identified options. And the deliberation that would go on there that would move it into that next phase of acting together. And we titled that decision point making resourceful decisions because it was decisions made by all of those involved, all of the stakeholders, all of the people. And I will say that the learning around those phases was really about, we found that when people didn't take the time to prepare, then they had to go back. And if they weren't ready in that prepare phase, it was hard to move through that cycle. We also were finding that people would jump from inquiry over to synthesis without analyzing. And then they wondered why things weren't working. And then we also found that having this model with the 5 steps and the decision points, where it's the point on those arrows, the launch, the clarify the issue, identify options, make resourceful decisions, that those were so important as sort of the next step indicators to help communities be more successful in their work. So I will add that in addition to those 5 areas, that the heart of effective civic engagement is the processes that are in the center there. And it's about knowing those processes that overlaps with that facilitation role that I talked about, but it's knowing how to support and encourage genuine discussion, reflection, and collaboration as we do that work in those ways. So with that, just the last little piece that I would share in that center section, discussion includes both dialogue and deliberation. That dialogue is discussion to promote the understanding, and then the dialogue informs the deliberation. And so that whole notion of discussion encompasses a lot of things. And the deliberation is really the discussion aimed at reaching a decision. So I'm curious if you, just given that very brief overview, I'm going to turn it to you to consider what parts of this model connect to your own experiences in working in communities. And if you have a thought or two to share in the chat, I would welcome that. And I might pull out one of those and invite someone to share a little bit more. I will preface that as I look at the comments that show up. Does it resonate in some ways? How does your work, or what parts of the model can you connect with?
Jody, I can actually say that the Act Together has been something that has been really powerful in what we've been doing with the Joint SEDS project up here in Northwest Minnesota.
Thank you for that, Ronnie. I appreciate that. And you get there, right, by building and preparing and having those conversations up front.
I actually kind of use the civic engagement model to build the engagement plan for the 4-year EDA program. We've been having to garner public input on 2 comprehensive economic development strategies in Northwest Minnesota.
Mm.
And this will be the final year, and hopefully next year we'll have public engagement on the review of the 2 sets.
Yes, excellent. I'm going to invite Mary, if you wouldn't mind. Would you say a little bit more about the preparation being a key stage? Would you be willing to unmute and share there?
Certainly. I work at the Illinois State Water Survey, and my experience over the past 10 years has been preparation, which includes not just internal preparation for outreach meetings, but knowing who we're going to outreach to. We sort of act out of Champaign in Illinois to counties around the state and don't really get the opportunity to actually meet and greet people face to face. So that preparation of outreach to specific members of the community that we hope will see us through the whole of our FEMA project is very crucial to us.
Yes, and I believe that I agree and support that, yes. And the fact of paying attention to who's even invited to the table and doing our homework, as it might be, to pay attention to who are the stakeholders, who needs to be at the table, what perspectives need to be there. And even our capacity to facilitate those types of conversations needs to be there as well. A couple of other comments there in the chat are related to that acting together. And sometimes it can be challenging. And the reason that it showed up in our model was that if you prepared well and took time for the inquiry and the analyze stages, then begin to synthesize, it built that energy and momentum. If you did those first steps well, then you could make those types of decisions and be able to act collectively, not just people going off on their own. And it does then address the issue. And the part of the model that I didn't talk about was that point where it says act together to address the issue, which sparks change. And sometimes the change leaps into the next iteration of something, because we're dealing with so many, what we refer to those wicked problems. There's no solutions to some of the things that we're working on. And so I see it as an iterative cycle where we have a presenting issue, we address that, we move through that process, and it moves us to the next place. And being mindful of that can be so valuable. So a few other chats are showing up, items showing up there in chat, so I appreciate that. I'm going to ask Jeff, would you be willing to unmute and talk a little bit more about that synthesize stage? What you're sharing there?
Yeah, I'd love to. So when I was thinking about this, I'm coming from a community health and public health background at the community level, and there's many different ways to address an issue in a community, and oftentimes, from what I've seen on the ground, that tends to accelerate or happen with greater reach or more forcefully if you layer those things together. And it's a really strong way for communities to participate in the ways that different individuals and organizations are able to or want to, and bring different pieces of what they have to the puzzle, and makes that acting together easier later. So just that, thinking on it, and that hit me really hard while I was looking at this model.
Yeah, and when we hear those multiple perspectives, right, and we're seeing where that's at, that just adds more. That adds more credibility, it adds more energy, momentum, all of those pieces. So thank you. I'm glad I asked you to unmute, because that's just really wise and thoughtful of how we're working through this. So I'm going to thank everyone for your insights. And before I turn this presentation over to my colleagues, I wanted to share just one last little bit of example of our work here in Minnesota with you, and give this an opportunity to chat about that. So we have these three elements of our work. We started with that way back in the day, and back in 2004, and we've continued to evolve. And every one of these has evolved over time. Our programming in leadership, which there's a lot about focusing on those cohorts and building knowledge, skills, and abilities to help people take action. And our facilitation, offering a lot of courses for skill building around multiple levels, from basic meetings to process design, are all really important. However, and that's still foundational to our teaching in communities. But it's our programming and civic engagement that working with partners to create collaborative environments is shifting. Or maybe it's not even shifting, but cycling back to the type of work that we once did, and have really figured it out in new ways. And so I would say that prior to 2004, educators were invited to facilitate conversations around challenges in communities. And then somewhere there in the middle, we started our civic engagement cohorts, where we were teaching the process education to groups like watersheds. A lot of environmental groups were really interested in that at the time. And so a cohort with the same people coming together over time to learn seemed to be a really good way to help them build their skills. And sometimes it was building their leadership skills, sometimes their civic engagement skills, sometimes their facilitation skills. They're all connected. But it was really about building their capacity. And now today, we continue to learn. Now we see a need for education, which is that combination of facilitation, of building competence, of civic engagement, building the connections and collaboration with community partners. And leadership is still there with that need to build confidence in individuals to that they would have the skills to facilitate in those challenging spaces. We often find ourselves in teaching modes that includes not that formal, here's a presentation I'm doing, but it's really walking alongside folks, coaching, co-facilitating with them again to help build their capacity. So this has been a 5,000-foot view of our programming, just kind of the brief overview. And now we'd like to transition and invite you to think about how civic engagement shows up in your work. And what we have is a Mentimeter. And if you would be so kind as to, if you want to use your phone, just click on that QR code, point your camera there and go to that. Or also in the chat. Thanks, Holly Arp. Holly's our program leader in civic engagement, leadership and civic engagement. She's running the links today. So if you want to click on that and go on your computer and share an example of how civic engagement looks in your work. And I think the QR code is also on there. It is. Abby shifted it right there. So thanks, Abby. What does it look like in your work? I'm going to shift my screens around here so I can see some of those. So as they start coming in, we're hearing some of the methods, right? The modes and the methods where people are doing that. Co-creating definitions. Now, that has me intrigued. And so we might want to pick up on that one, Abby. I'm going to give her a wink for where we're going to be going next. Some of that strategic planning, coalition formation. I can diverse stakeholders. Those coalitions that really reach out around lots of things. Community initiatives, the one specific one I see there, community gardens. Youth programming. I see across the board here. And I really appreciate whoever put stakeholders and shareholders, because that using that word stakeholders, kind of flows, but this notion of shareholders, that they're sharing in the interests of that topic. Thank you for that note that you put in there. Input from people with those lived experiences and that expertise. So often people think, well, I don't know anything about this, but they have that lived experience. They know the context. They're experts in the context and knowing the situations, and keeping that there is so helpful. I'm going to transition to Abbey here. Are there any things there that you wanted to lift out that I might not have named, or are you ready to move on to the next space?
Well, thank you, Jody. I think I'm about ready. I will say that just as a whole, looking at this, it's great to see the variety, and that ties into what I'd like to talk about. I've got this being nice to one another is civic engagement, and it's just like lingering on my screen. So, instead of messing around and using our time for that, we'll just leave that there because I think that's an interesting point, and I'm going to tie that in. So thank you, Jody. As I came into this work, I come from a background in nonprofit leadership and K-12 music education, actually. And coming in, I had to do a deep dive myself on what is civic engagement anyway. And this is important because if we want to engage with our communities and explain our work, have the public understand whom we serve, what is civic engagement? I think it's important that we're able to express that, in a concise way. Now, when I did my deep dive and I was doing some research on this, we find that civic engagement, we have on Google 383,000 citations. This was 2005, and we know there's been a resurgence in interest in this topic. So it's in fairly wide use. It goes on to say, I don't have the whole article here, of course. It goes on to say that although it's in fairly wide use, there's no really unified definition. Now, this other author has pointed out that it presents formidable challenges, and there's lots of different definitions. And I think, I mean, here's another example, a definition where they give examples. And as you could see in our Mentimeter, there were many different examples, a wide range from being nice to one another to the more formal side of the work that we do. And then we have yet another author talking about why we should clarify what we mean. It's important, like I was saying, because if we are to serve the public, we must communicate what we're talking about. So I come back to this question, my head's spinning. What is civic engagement anyway? It's hard to pin down to one definition, and I have two ways of thinking about this that have clarified it for me. So the first way that I've been thinking about this is a continuum of civic engagement. So with the variety of ways we can take part in this, we can go from a scale of informal civic engagement all the way over to formal, public, and collective. And here I have listed different examples again. So all the way over from helping a neighbor, you could put being nice to one another is civic engagement, right? Especially if you're working towards an initiative, co-working on something with a community member, or all the way over to running for public office to the sustained intensive service. My argument is that the broader look or the broader perspective we can have on what is civic engagement, the better, because we know that connecting with people, being an active member in your community, the perception of being connected and plugged in, has positive impacts on well-being and overall health outcomes, which in our work in community development, ultimately, that is my goal, and that is actually the vision of our department that we've been working towards, is these thriving communities where Minnesotans are flourishing. And that's kind of to tie back to the title here. That's the good for me, is that there's such a range of possibilities. The good that there are a lot of ways we can engage, and it's a choose your own, choose what you can do. Kathy is going to talk a little bit more about the different the things that come along with the variety and the strengths, the weaknesses on either side, informal and formal. So put a pin in that. Now, as I came away from this spectrum, I was like, well, I see there are so many different activities, but still, why is it so hard to define here? And this was the second part of helping me understand. And my why it's so hard is because depending on who you are, it will change the way you're thinking about what is civic engagement and what you're looking for. So I was thinking about, okay, if I am blank, and I was Googling civic engagement, right? What would I be looking for? So as a community member, I might be looking for a general understanding of what civic engagement means for me. This resurgence of like community involvement. What are my options? What can I do? I'm looking for a straightforward definition, maybe, which that might be hard to come by. And that, honestly, that kind of is the bad, to tie back to the title for me. I don't think it's a strength in our field that it's hard to define or explain. However, if I were a leader of an organization or a representative and I was looking for civic engagement, I might be looking for ways to engage with the community. So more of like this top-down kind of approach. I might be looking for how to get more volunteers involved. I might be looking for board retention, that type of civic engagement. Or if I'm a local official, how do I get more people at city council meetings, right? On the formal side. And then we have the research, the academic side of things. Researchers might be looking more towards process, participation levels, outcomes, impacts, this process model type of research and work that Jody was sharing. So this is why, to me, it is difficult to come to a single understanding of what we are talking about, and yet under one common goal, which is to improve conditions or shape the future of our communities. And so, not to be prescriptive, rather to help you understand where we're coming from, our working definition that we've adapted and we wordsmithed and we toyed around with in preparing this work is as follows. Our working definition: civic engagement describes how people act in a community to improve conditions and shape the community's future. 4 pieces of that puzzle. We have the people, we've got the action, actually doing something, coming together, act together, as was pointed out in the chat too, that this is the difficult part of the process and important piece of it. Communities, so the places, the interests, causes, all kinds of communities, broad definition there as well, not just a physical place necessarily, coming together in that space to do something. And then the future. Ultimately, we're working towards something together, and there has to be an idea of what it is. And then my personal takeaway, you're going to have your opportunity in a second to make an argument for something else if you wish. But my ultimate takeaway here is that it's how we care for each other. It's how we care for each other in including each other in a process, not just moving forward from a high level making decisions, but how we get those voices in. And I think, Jody, you said something about thinking about who is invited to the table, who is even participating or contributing to these conversations. And civic engagement at its best, I believe, does include those voices, and it takes care to do that. All right, and so I have also here the vision, which I referred to earlier, the thriving Minnesota communities where people flourish. That's what we're working towards the care. Now, I would like to know, how do you define civic engagement? So we asked for examples in your work, and again, we'll go back to that. It's the same Menti. How do you define civic engagement with all that in mind? How are you thinking about this? What is your definition? It could be what we what you thought, what you brought into this, or what you've gleaned now. I will flip this back to the Mentimeter and switch the slide. I think I have to switch the slide quick. All right, there you go. How do you define civic engagement? We still have our comment here, being nice to one another. I'm gonna try to see if I can work on that while you all put the how you put your definitions in here. I'll refer back to our title once again. The good, the bad, the learning. My learning is that this act of defining, very difficult. Difficult and important, once again, if we're engaging the public, being able to communicate what we're trying to do in a way that's accessible. I see in the chat, Rick said, it seems that you are just redefining the process of community development. Rick, would you be willing to say more about that?
Maybe. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I've been thinking I'm retired community developer, and that includes being an agent in 2 different state extension programs, as well as state government. And now I find myself thinking about community development more and more than I ever have, and how that relates to uh, the perspectives of the various practitioners like yourself, younger practitioners that have come up through different programs and learning opportunities through different pathways. And so that's one reason why I'm sort of tuning in on this civic engagement, to sort of try to figure out what the landscape looks like. And I know I'm not addressing your question directly, but it's a conundrum for me, because I see that possibly when I took my degree in 81, how many were alive back then? It was different. It seems to me it felt different. We were engaged in different ways, in different people. We were coming out of, you know, perspectives and skill building and engagement. That's even a new word for me. Involvement, participation. Those maybe older words defined how I felt and thought about what I was involved with. So
Yeah.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah, I was gonna thank you
Yeah.
for that.
Okay.
Did you have something else to add at the end there?
Yeah.
I don't want to cut you
It's
off.
time to move on. Uh, so,
Well, thank
but
you.
anyway, I just want to end by saying I think it's important for us to try to do what you're doing and grab something that can unify the field, with terminology and vocabulary and action related skill building. So thanks for doing this. I don't think I answered your question and took up a little bit of your time, but I appreciate your efforts.
Oh, well, thank you. And you're right. You make a good point. And my favorite part of this work is hearing from other people, not hearing my own voice. I used to be a singer, so I heard enough of my own voice on recordings. So I appreciate your contribution there. And one thing I want to talk about that you said is seeing younger practitioners, right? No, I was not around in 81, not at all. And I think you're right that younger people, you have to remember the people who are up and coming, the young adults now, 5 years ago, if they graduated from high school, that was during COVID. And the young people coming up now, the people that we're looking for, my peers even, a bit younger than me, but my peers essentially, civic engagement is an intimidating word. Community development is a kind of a foreign concept. And so I think it's really important that if we're going to use these words, right, like you're saying, we need to unify and come together on an understanding that is relatable, that is inspiring to younger people, because that's who we're looking to, whether for leadership, whether for civic engagement, whether for community development anyway. So thank you, Rick. Thank you everyone for your thoughtful responses on here on the Menti. You should be able to have access to that yet after I exit Civic. What is Civic? Oh, John in the chat. What is Civic Engagement from behind our keyboards and screens? Maybe that is a follow-up webinar. I did a 5-part series on this civic engagement last year and got a tiny bit into the rabbit hole of virtual civic engagement. So it's a great question. I'm gonna put a pin in that. That's all I'm gonna say because I could go on. I'm gonna switch back to the slides now. Thank you for those definitions. And Kathy, I would like if you would take it away if you're ready.
Sure, I am. Thank you everybody so much for having us. My name is Kathy and I'm very glad to be with you. We've been talking a lot about these definitions, and the point of that is not to try to be trite about it, nor are we trying to create a definition that everybody should use, but that clarity really helps. And one of the things that's been coming to mind when I see all of your varying definitions, it's really bringing to mind the IAP2 spectrum of public participation. That I think many of you are probably familiar with. It's just a spectrum of public participation that goes from, informing to fully co-producing decisions. And the relevance of that is that there isn't a judgment there about where you should be on the spectrum. There's a sense that you need to be consistent about clear yourself about what your objectives are, and align your activities to those, but also communicate clearly not only to yourself and your own colleagues and team and partners, but also to a broader public about what your objectives are. And I think that message is helpful as an orienting device for ourselves and for others, and that applies in the field of civic engagement too. So if we go back to the cycle that Jody showed us at the beginning, the model that community development and the University of Minnesota has been using, those values, expectations, and beliefs about what the role of the community development professional is, but also what the community roles are, can be very different. That's why there's a question mark in the middle of this. If we see that public issue that's emerging, is it the job of a community development professional interested in civic engagement to say, gosh, I think some education about this issue or some basic civic education might be helpful right now. What should I do to see if I can get that underway? Or are we meant to be in more of a responsive role? Can we participate? If people call on us to facilitate, does their expectation of facilitation go beyond facilitating a process to expecting that we somehow mediate it and make some problems go away? Or there are other kinds of things here that we might expect. So I want to go to the next slide and go back to the spectrum that Abbey shared with us earlier, and just emphasize as a little bit of a provocation, some of the things that if you're leaning into one end or another of this spectrum, some of the things that you likely are doing, and what that might imply about some things that you are maybe not doing. These are not exclusive kinds of choices that you might make, but this is meant in service to those on the call today to really think about, where are you in terms of the activities and your imagination and your frameworks, and therefore what are maybe some of the things you are and are not doing. So if you tend toward that more informal side of individual and private work, you are probably, as a community development and extension professional, maybe focusing on building systems that effectively identify individual needs in the community, that encourage a spirit of community care. Maybe you're helping to create some networks and some resources so that those community needs can be addressed, whether that is by encouraging people to contribute to charities, through their volunteering, through helping a neighbor. But maybe you are not so involved in what might be characterized as more politicized analyses of the issues, right? You're trying to mobilize individuals to connect with one another. I love that diagram that looks like they're dancing, right? To connect with one another to address those issues, but maybe a little bit less oriented to exploring broader based options for like policy change or community level change. Let's go to the next one. If your view of civic engagement tends to more traditional civic education, Maybe you're really involved in helping to convene, get started, or frame up political conversations. Maybe you are part of activities to get out the vote. Maybe you are really encouraging people to feel that they do have a place and they are prepared to participate in parties or interest groups. Your probably education activities are really more around helping people to understand how government policies and parties work and their rights and responsibilities. You are not maybe so oriented to what the business or the nonprofit sector is doing. You might be less focused on other kinds of civic institutions. And you also might be just running that boundary between what is too political, right? And we're not here to put a definition on what is too political or if that's inappropriate, but you were kind of in that zone of negotiating that quite a bit. Let's go to the last of the spectrum, and then we're going to have a question for you. If your view tends more to the leadership development side of civic engagement, then maybe you are really, your activities are much more focused on creating leadership self-image, that yes, you are a leader, creating self-awareness, and really skill building activities around at multiple levels that are helping people to get into that more sustained, intensive level of service, maybe running for public office, maybe really understanding organizations. And those might be education activities around everything from how to run a basic meeting to really community level process design kind of work. And that may mean that you are, because you're focusing on leadership, depending on whether you're more individually or collaboratively focused, maybe you're not so oriented to working with partners to create collaborative environments or create systems for policy change. These were meant as provocations. You might agree or disagree a little bit with some of them, but let's go to the question for you, which is, we promised you a webinar about the good, the bad, and the learning. And I know that sometimes some of those bad experiences are some of the most instructive. So would you please answer the question that Holly has just put in the chat for us, which is, how and when might promoting civic engagement not be advisable, not be constructive, or not be possible? So please share your own learnings with us, and we'll just be quiet for a minute or two and give you a minute to collect your thoughts and pop them in the chat. I love Rochelle's comment. Sometimes it's a timing issue. There just isn't time, right? It takes time to do it thoughtfully. Or if you don't understand the context, yes, you might be wading in at the wrong time or putting your foot in it, right? When harm to others is being promoted, right? We have our own interior ethical boundaries, right? And ethical compass points about when we don't want to step in. Yes, other concerns about inauthenticity from Michael too. When the call for change is doing it for the wrong reasons. When there isn't enough bottom-up public participation, that's bypassing some of that. Yeah, these are terrific. When people are being left out, sidelined. Yeah, a lot of these consistency, right, around that tokenization, limited participation, people with lived experience are being left out, when we're neglecting the bottom-up approach, right, when there are manipulative processes that are doing that. Yeah, these are terrific. Well, we want to leave some time for discussion, so we will just share with you a few observations we had among ourselves. If you want to go to the next slide, Abbey. These are some of our observations about how and when civic engagement might not be advisable. One of them is when you just really cannot find your way into that expectation about being neutral and responsive and not being an activator, right? Maybe, is it appropriate within your role, within your own organization, your self-image, community expectations, that you do try to initiate, that you take a position, that you help to frame up issues, or are you merely being responsive, and are you comfortable with what it is you're being asked to respond to? getting into the mess of power relations, maybe getting taken along for a little bit of a ride, being asked to play a role that's not constructive, or that's playing right into that, or that doesn't give you enough room and degrees of freedom to decide how and to help that broader range of stakeholders and shareholders to participate. Sometimes an inauthentic process. So I understand there's some stuff here around tokenization. I can certainly say from my own experience that I have thought that I've had very, very, very clear conversations with the leaders who are ultimately going to make the final call about whether something is an advisory or a consultative process. They've said it's consultative. They've said there's decision-making power by the community, and in the end, they didn't mean that at all. It's really a recipe for burnout. So getting that super, super, super clear at the beginning is helpful. And then there's a lot of foment right now, right, around civic engagement in general, which is not a, that's not a call to back off from it, but just, it doesn't mean it's not advisable, it just means we need some additional caution around it. So the assertion we've been making is that being clear about our frameworks and roles helps us to navigate some of these dilemmas and to set up not only our own compass points, but also maybe to head off some of those misunderstandings as well. So I'm going to hand it back to Abbey for a few minutes here at the end for some questions and answers.
Thank you, Kathy. And I invite Jody or Kathy, you to jump back in too. I'm just looking at the chat. I love this chat. It's really good. There's some great points in here. I'm trying to see. There were a couple that jumped out to me, or let's see. Okay, Jody, you responded. I would love if Jody, you could speak to this question of civic engagement versus community development, community engagement. Take it away.
I was trying to get to my unmute, so sorry about that. It is one of those things. Again, we all define it differently. So I was just sharing one of the ways I think about it. I think about civic engagement as those actions and participation of people in public life. And you put a lot of examples out there when you talked about ways of looking at that, Abbey. And with community development, I see that as maybe a more holistic process where it's focused on transforming and a lot of conditions within community through organized efforts. So I think civic engagement is an important component of community development. It's sort of what drives it forward, and it's an important element in order to develop community. So it's subtle, and yet for me, that's one of the ways I think about it. Others may have other takes or perspectives. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
And chiming in, are they? No.
Thanks, Jody. Yeah. I think community engagement, when I think of that, you see a lot of nonprofits now with a whole position dedicated to community engagement. And again, that being, and again, this is just what I see with the official unified definitions. With the absence of that, I see a lot of community engagement positions being more of that top-down approach in organizations, civic engagement, often being more, like you said, Jody, on the actions side. Yep. And in the chat also, Michael and Mary talking about the recording and the slides. Also, they will be shared out on the website on the link there.
I was just looking if there were others here that other comments we wanted to lift up. Did anything stand out to you, Kathy?
Well, I was just looking at Sununda's comment about by good and bad, do we mean like this is a binary opposition? And I think that is a really good question. And there is certainly a lot of really cynical literature out there, and a lot of it really well placed. But to me, I think the more important question is not a binary yes, no, should we, like whether we do it, but how we do it, which to me means with whom and when and to what level. And, those are not always our own calls to make. I mean, we're participants, we're responsive, we're not necessarily the drivers, right? But there are so many design choices to be made with really careful attention to power dynamics. And like you, Abby, I'm loving these comments and input.
We always want to end on a high note, but I guess I have sort of a low note question to ask, and then maybe we can end on a high note. And I do want to thank all of you. It's sort of a two-part quick thing. One would be, what is the role of agency in this, and is agency a necessary condition in order to propose civic engagement as an option? If you don't have agency, then is it relevant for you to civically engage around something? And the other piece is these countervailing effects that are out there that are friction forces against civic engagement, like power imbalance and polarization and resistance to change. How do we overcome those things that seem to be so prevalent in our society at the moment so we can effectively civically engage?
So Michael, when you're asking about agency, are you thinking for us as individuals, as part of communities, or as our work through cooperative extension? I'm curious.
That's a great question, Jody. It could be both, right? At times we're our own private citizens and we want to civically engage, but do we have agency in that space? But then I think extension has been wringing its hands over whether it has agency in certain spaces as well, and it's been questioned whether we do or not. Should we be there or get out of the way? I think that's something we should struggle with.
Michael, there's an article that I don't know if Holly put it in the chat today or not.
Yeah, I just
the article from back in 1984. Do you want to share a little bit about that, Holly?
Sure. I just put it in because it's been an article that we referenced in extension quite a bit. It's to take a stand or not, and I think it goes through that dilemma. What agency do we have? What are in grappling with how are we taking a stand or advocating or organizing, even if we might be cautious about naming it that? And so, another way to look at it, one way to look at it is, do you have agency? Another way to look at it is, do we understand the agency that we have, and are we using it appropriately? And I think that article, even though it's from 1984, is still relevant and offers some really good questions for us today.
It might be apropos that it's from 1984.
Maybe.
I think about that, what our role is. I had someone a participant in a conversation I was facilitating once around, a community issue. I think of it as my civic engagement work, said, "Oh, I finally understand your role. You're a lobbyist." And I'm like, "I'm a lobbyist?" And then he went on to say, "You're a lobbyist for good process." And I went, "Oh, I think our role in extension, if we feel we have that agency, then we need to really hone our skills and be good at what we do in order to be able to feel comfortable stepping in or feeling like this is the place we should step in." And a lot of it does go back to the process. Are we involving and encouraging viewpoints, are we taking a multi-partial approach to this and the facilitation and making sure the voices are there? And are we doing that work well? Is also a part of that. I have agency as an individual to get involved in communities, but in my work in extension, I also feel I have that agency because I've built skills in certain areas. So I don't know if that goes to your question or not, Michael, but.
Thank you for that, Jody. Well, I stole 2 minutes from you guys, and so we've stolen 2 minutes from everybody else, but I do really, really want to appreciate our speakers today. Everyone give them a round of applause. They did an absolutely wonderful job. I hope that everyone takes care. The webinar recording will be available on the NCRCRD website. There's a lot more to this, and I look forward to continued conversation around this very important subject of civic engagement. So take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week at our next webinar. Thanks, everyone.